Welcome to the Outthinker podcast. Each week, we talk with forward-looking strategists and innovators that are challenging the status quo, leading the future of business, and shaping our world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of the Outthinker Strategy Network.
So you need first to realize that the root cause of disruption is not technology. Technology is not what's causing disruption. What's causing disruption is consumers are changing their needs and wants. And when they do that, they change their behaviors. That creates an opportunity for new products and services to be offered to them, often in a different type of offering that we call a business model.
That was Thales Teixeira, the co-founder of digital disruption consultancy Decoupling, and previously the Lumry Family Associate Professor at Harvard Business School, where he taught for 10 years. He has taught MBA, doctoral, and executive education courses in marketing models, digital marketing, and e-commerce. His two primary domains of research constitute digital disruption and the economics of attention. He's the author of dozens of articles published in trade press outlets such as Harvard Business Review, the McKinsey Quarterly, Think with Google, and in academic journals such as Marketing Science, JMR, JM, and JAR. His research and opinions have been routinely featured in the New York Times, the Financial Times, among others. In his most recent book, Unlocking the Customer Value Chain, How Decoupling Drives Consumer Disruption, he dives into his concept of decoupling. The idea that what drives disruption is not technology or new innovations, but the ability to identify and create solutions in the links along the customer value chain. We dig into this concept and its implications in this episode, including his definition of the customer value chain and where it really starts and ends, which is contrary to what we traditionally have thought. How disruption is not so much about competitors as it is about understanding your customers' points of view. How startups can create disruption by learning how to target weaknesses in the customer value chain neglected by incumbent organizations, and how incumbent organizations can stay competitive by beating others to disrupting their own value chain, even those not heavily invested in technology. Ladies and gentlemen, Thales Teixeira. Thales, thank you so much for being here. We've been working to get you on the show for a long time, and it's a thrill to finally get to talk to you. What I'd like to open up with is the same two questions I ask all our guests. The first is just to give us an opportunity to know you a little bit more personally. Could you complete the sentence for me? If you really know me, you know that.
You would know that I love to talk about business strategy, business models, business innovation, you name it. Ever since I was a child, I could remember in the backseat of my parents' cars when we were traveling through Brazil, I can remember having this fascination to understand what happened inside companies, right? So we would pass by the Ford factory or in the center of São Paulo and see the Citibank building. I would be wondering what happened inside those buildings, in the top floor, inside the headquarters of Coca-Cola, all of these businesses. So I had a fascination about business ever since I was probably like 10, 11, 12 years old.
Interesting. Next question. And I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about this. What's your definition of strategy?
Now we might start to wander on the philosophical aspects of business. I frankly have given up on the term, to be honest. I've read many dozens of articles entitled What is Strategy, How to Do Strategy, How to Come Up with Strategy by the likes of Michael Porter, Roger Martin, and many others. And every time I would read them, it would all make sense. But I guess internalizing it was a hard part, not just for me, but for many business executives that I talked to. Most business executives don't really know what it is, like how it's formally defined by other academics. More recently, I've visited many startups and talked to the founders, entrepreneurs. They don't really care that much about business strategy. They do it, but they don't care about the term of strategy as a competitive strategy is now. Consultants don't seem to know much. They disagree on the terms. And even my former Harvard Business School colleagues outside of the strategy unit, they don't have much of a clue or an agreement. So I use the term strategy probably 10, 20 times a day. I know that most people mean, when they say strategy, they mean a very important decision. And academics have tried to hone in on the term and change people's mind, make it much more precise terminology according to what they see it. But I guess they keep coming up and trying to say, no, you don't know what strategy is. Let me explain to you what strategy is. So I think it's time for us to basically give up, admit that the term has taken a life of its own. Most people mean strategy, and it's a very important business decision. And I just think that we need to come up with narrower terms as opposed to trying to re-educate people on what strategy is. But if you force me to say, Thales, what do you say strategy is? I would probably define it as conscious renouncement.
Conscious renouncement? Could you just explain that?
Yeah, so I think from what I read, it's this idea of clearly defining what the company should not be doing. Have a consciousness of we could go for this market, we could compete in this sector, we could develop these products and capabilities, but we chose not to for conscious reason because of XYZ reasons. And for that, we decide to narrowly focus where we play, how we play, and how do we execute on our higher level mission by XYZ factors, right? So that's what I mean by conscious renouncement.
I love that. Yeah, I don't disagree that the definition of strategy has trailed off into many directions. One of the reasons we asked that question is because it's surprising that even experts can't agree. It's not like there are two schools of thought. There are hundreds of schools of thought, as opposed to, say, other professions, medicine or law. So thank you for that.
Sure. I think that's a problem. I actually think that if the thinkers disagree on it, I think we could disagree on how to implement a business strategy, principles and important aspects of it. But I don't think we should be disagreeing on what the term means. And so that's part of the reason why I think we should give up on it. Just assume that it's taken a life of its own and different people have a different understanding of it. And mostly they've congregated around this thing of it's very important, high-level decisions that have long-term implications for companies.
Interesting. Yeah. And yeah, there are other terms that I think have trailed off, but maybe not to the extent the strategy has. If we say innovation or we say disruption, you have a very specific definition of disruption. Could you share that with us?
Yes. So my late colleague who passed away a few years ago, Clay Christensen, he came out with the term disruption first, then disruptive innovations. And I still remember talking to him, and I still remember the last article that he wrote trying to tell people, no, you're using the term wrong. This is disruption. This is disruptive innovation. After having written, dozens of articles, he still felt that he needed to re-explain his term. I have a different definition for disruption. For me, disruption is a phenomenon that happens in any potential market where the established players, what we call the incumbents, lose a significant amount of market share in a short period of time. Significant amount of market share, I mean not 5, 7%, 10, 20, 30. Sometimes we have cases of 40 or 50, 60% of market share, like Nokia did, in a matter of 10 years or less, sometimes 7 or 5 years in some cases. Disruption for me is this process in which huge incumbent companies lose this market share. And we all know who are the ones that are gaining them, right? Stealing them. These are startups and tech companies. Well, the majority are.
So yes, I'd love to follow that through then. I know that your work, as I understand it, began at Harvard. You were teaching, I believe, e-commerce and digital marketing. You collected a lot of insights as you studied the stories of disruptors. And you arrived at some very counterintuitive conclusions. One of them that I find really fascinating, that maybe I would call one of your most significant contributions to this dialogue of strategy disruption, is decoupling. I was wondering if you could explain that to us.
Sure. So I think I stumbled upon a phenomenon. I started, as you know, at Harvard Business School with Ray Case. So we visit companies and talk to their founders and executives. And I was doing that initially for big companies, right? For Nissan in Japan, Coca-Cola in the US, many other big established companies. And they were starting to see the impact of startups stealing part of their market share. And I asked them, what's going on? Why is that happening? And they would tell me their hypotheses or reasoning. And it often revolved around this idea of technology and startups or tech companies and a lot of funding and so on and so forth. But then when I would visit the startups to break cases, and one of the first startups that I actually visited at the request of them, I was invited, was Facebook, way before their IPO. And I gave a presentation and I asked, how are you planning to disrupt the social media industry, given that there are other players already out there And they would tell me an explanation that doesn't revolve much around technology. I did the same thing with Netflix, invited to give a talk and then asked them, how are you planning to disrupt the online video streaming business? And they would give me explanations that didn't much revolve around technology. And so I started collecting this, visiting Airbnb and many other less well-known startups. And I saw that there was a disconnect between what incumbents saying was causing their demise, their disruption, and what the startups and tech companies were saying they were doing to try to disrupt market. What I came upon was understanding that the startups often start narrowly in doing one activity that they've identified that the incumbents don't do very well. For example, the biggest retailer of beauty products in the world is called Sephora. And you go to a Sephora store and they help you identify products that you might like. And they have these beauty consultants and they open up the box, put it in your skin and your hair, things like that. And it seems awesome that you can sample in the store and then figure out which one to buy, take it home, so on and so forth. But what was happening is mostly women and younger women in particular were realizing that there's so much innovation in beauty and they didn't want to go to a Sephora store, drive there, stay there, get a beauty consultant, and they put on the makeup and the skincare and so on, and then decide what to buy, go home. They didn't want to spend their time doing that. So a startup called Birchbox said, well, we're going to give you pay us $10 a month. We'll give you a subscription to sample of beauty products at your house. You will receive a box with around 5 samples of beauty products, and you can do that yourself. And then this company, the startup founded by Harvard Business School students, Birchbox, exploded and it grew really fast. But it started with a very simple activity, which was helping people sample beauty products. Initially, it didn't sell full-size items. Once you discover what you like, you could go to Amazon. You can even go to Sephora. And so that's an example of decoupling, in which if you think about it, a customer has to identify what beauty products they like, what works for them. So they come in there, they choose, and they make a first purchase on the full-size item. If they like it, they replenish it, buy it again and again and again. What happened in this case was that consumers were unsatisfied with what the incumbent was providing in one narrow activity, which is sampling beauty products. And so this process, Birchbox entered into the market by decoupling this customer value chain, the activities that customers do to actually derive value from products and services. Instead of Birchbox saying, we're going to create our retailer and we're going to do everything, Birchbox just focused on one activity.
Just a clarification question. So I think you're starting to lay out this customer value chain. And when I first tried to start understanding it, I was thinking it was like a buying journey. But that's not really. It's not kind of a linear time-based journey. Could you explain or define this customer value chain?
Sure. And I get this question a lot. The customer journey or the customer buying process or whatever you want to call it is simply the series of steps that consumers go through in order to acquire products and services. I have to go to the store. I have to compare options. I have to pay. I have to take it home, so forth. So generally, customer journeys stop when people buy products. First of all, buying products is only part of the process. To understand what customers really want, they need to buy products. They need to have it delivered or take it home. They need to use the product. And sometimes, if it's a durable good, they need to dispose of these products. So all these activities matter to customers. Right now, people are starting to think about, well, disposing of certain products is a hassle and I don't want to throw it away in the landfill. So therefore, I'm changing the way I purchase things because of that last activity. So I look at it much broader, not just the buying process, but how consumers derive value from products. In the cases, using the product is what matters in the case of cosmetics. But there's also other activities in this so-called customer journey. There's activities that people do that are necessary evils. They don't derive value from going physically to the store. They don't derive value from just comparing options. Derive value from using it. And so these are what I call value eroding activities. It's necessary evils, these activities that don't create value for customers, but they're forced to do. So in the past, we were forced to go to Blockbuster. Now, Netflix eliminated this activity, the value eroding activity, and we're all better off. And the last types of activities in a customer value chain are value capturing activities. Basically, how the company captures value from consumers, either through a subscription, through a payment of a product, through a fee or some other form. So all businesses operate in the customer value chain, and consumers go through these activities, and some activities are value creating for them, some are value eroding for them, and some are value capturing from them.
Gotcha. where I want to get to, a lot of our audience, I think, would like to understand is how an incumbent can respond to this decoupling. But I just want to see if we can just understand from the disruptor's point of view what they're doing. So could you illustrate that, an example of a decoupling, and show that, it doesn't have to be tech enabled? You've got lots of really fascinating examples. Would you mind just sharing one?
Sure. So just to backtrack one, these startups, they gained a foothold on the market by starting with one narrow activity. In the case of Birchbox, it started with sampling. Way back ago, if we remember, we started, probably you and I, we started buying books on Amazon. And that's how we got to know the company. But then, obviously, Amazon grew into other categories. And one of the categories that it saw an opportunity was electronics. But at the time, Amazon knew that to buy electronics, people needed to listen to the sound system. They need to look at the TV, see the images. They need to touch and feel and experiment. And at the time, Amazon, as a pure e-commerce company, wasn't willing to build stores. So what did they do? They created an app that allowed you to go to any store, scan the barcode of a product, take a picture of the image, or just pin in the name of the product, and then you could search for it online. So with that, people started doing what we today really call showrooming. They go to a store like Best Buy, they ask for the help of a salesperson. They look at the TVs and look at the computers, and then they're like, oh, okay, now that I've identified the product that I want to buy, in your customer value chain, you have to choose the product. Then they would pull out their phones and see if Amazon offered it cheaper. In some cases, it did, because Amazon generally has lower costs than Best Buy, and they would buy the product oftentimes in the store. And so Amazon was disrupting Best Buy through this process of decoupling, because Amazon was saying, I'm not going to fulfill all these activities. I'm not going to help you choose. I'm not going to show you the items. I'm not going to let you test them. But you do that with Best Buy. So go to Best Buy and then pull out your phone and see if we have a cheaper price when you have chosen which item. So Amazon basically decided just to sell the product, not to showcase the product.
Fascinating. So yeah, I was going to ask you what the Best Buy decided to do, because Circuit City probably did something different. Probably Toys R Us did something different. Most category killers have been killed by Amazon, but Best Buy is an interesting story. So I'd love to hear how decoupling describes their response.
First, Best Buy was very worried about this. You can imagine you're investing all this money with salespeople, with inventory, infrastructure, stores, and then people come in. You create value for customers because they're testing the products. That's a value-creating activity in the customer's value chain. But if you don't sell it, you don't monetize. So Best Buy had a monetization strategy. Some of the people there that I talked to conjectured weird things, right? How about we put signal jamming devices in our stores, just like the ones available in prisons, so that people won't be able to use their phones in our store? A very non-customer-centric approach to it, but gladly they didn't go to this route. What they did is they realized that not only consumers were benefiting from the showcasing of these products by testing and figuring out what they wouldn't buy, but they realized that the suppliers were also benefiting. Regardless of whether Best Buy sold a TV to us or not, Samsung was always benefiting, because you buy it on Amazon or you buy it on Best Buy, Samsung was benefiting. So they said, so our manufacturers are our customers, and unless we sell the product, they are actually not helping us monetize it. So then what they realized is they started to charge the manufacturers like Samsung and others for what today in the grocery industry we call slotting fees. If you want to showcase your products, you have to pay for them. And that's how Best Buy bonded to the decoupling process of Amazon.
Interesting, yes. One curiosity. So what I understand from the theory is the disruptor identifies one very specific link in the customer value chain, decouples it. And so they're serving a very specific type of customer, a customer for whom that's very valuable. And I've heard you use the example of Airbnb, that their first customers were people that were in cities where there was a big conference and there were no other hotel rooms available. And so those were the first early customers. So my understanding is we start off with a narrow type of customer. Am I articulating that correctly?
That's exactly it, Karhan. It's a narrow customer and a narrow activity for that customer. The way I think about it, incumbent companies try to do lots of things for lots of customers. So imagine a bank, Bank of America or JP Morgan Chase. It has a variety of financial services that it offers, from the most wealthy to the lower classes of society. It does a lot of things for a lot of different types of customers. And if you think about startups, how can a startup even begin to start disrupting a bank? What explains the rise of fintechs? Well, startups get a foothold on the market by doing something narrow, a narrow activity in the customer value chain for a narrow group of people. So PayPal started with escrow accounts for people buying online products. Didn't do everything, right? Something very narrow. And in doing that, they did better than all of the other available companies and banks in specific. And that got them a little bit of traction. And then they started going to other activities in the customer value chain. For example, online payments and transfers. And then they moved into loans and credit cards and billing. So that's how they grew. Airbnb, as you said, started with rooms. Yelp started with customer reviews only. OpenTable with only reservations. Alibaba only with a business-to-business online website. And now Alibaba does practically everything. And they've become an incumbent, so to speak.
So then as the startup scales into an incumbent and starts playing in many links in the value chain, does their customer base broaden? Where this is coming from is just something that's come up many times on this podcast, other places. Is this idea of a large company, a large bank, being customer-centric in the way of saying, this is the kind of customer that we serve, and this kind of customer is not one that is the right customer for us? At scale, do large companies have to serve everyone or not?
All companies that become incumbents do two things. They broaden their offerings and they acquired customers with various different needs. The way to think about it is they have a kitchen and they start doing all sorts of types of dishes and they hire a bunch of people to be in the kitchen. In this process, sometimes they start burning the meat or they start missing the point on the dessert. That is the opportunity for the startup. When a company does a lot of things, it doesn't do everything in the best way possible for its customers. And customers realize it, right? If I ask you for examples of a telecom company or a bank that are not customer-centric, that irritate you, you and I can spend hours talking about these things. So there's a lot of opportunities and the startups are there to seize on these opportunities. They need to build a business. They have nowhere to go then up. And so they have to look at an opportunity where customers are being underserved or the established companies have just disregarded that activity and they think they can do well. So they start by doing something very narrowly, very well, and they start doing one dish. They do one dish very well. Even if they don't have all the resources initially, they don't have all the money, they don't have all the employees, they often don't even have the experience in the industry, right? Airbnb, the three founders had no experience in the hospitality industry, and they have the biggest hospitality company in the world. So no experience, no money, no people. How can that happen? Well, it happened because they identified a weak link. That's what I call it. The customer value chain, an activity that many customers are having to do, but they're unsatisfied with. And so they go and steal that activity from established companies. That is decoupling. Breaking of the links between activities in the customer value chain. The incumbent does many things. The startup says, I'm going to do this thing better.
Okay. So I got 15 more questions. We have only a few more minutes. I know that we're reaching the top of our time with you. I think the question that is most burning then is, we work both with startups and incumbents, but what does an incumbent do? What do they often get wrong when this decoupling is starting to take hold? And what should they do?
So they often get wrong the idea that what's the cause behind disruption in general or decoupling in particular, even if they don't know the concept, understand what's happening. And that's when they think the cause of disruption is disruptive technologies. Then they say, well, then we need to acquire those technologies. We either need to buy them from the market or build them internally. And once we have those technologies, we're not going to be disrupted anymore. I've talked to many established companies that said, well, we did that and it hasn't worked. We're still being disrupted. The technologies that we acquired or built did not help us regain our foothold in the market. And I have many examples of clients of mine as well as established companies. You can think of Xerox, you can think of Kodak, you can think of Nokia. They all had amazing technologies and went after technologies. And even in my book, I talk about Yahoo. It acquired like 200 plus startups. So you need first to realize that the root cause of disruption is not technology. Technology is not what's causing disruption. What's causing disruption is consumers are changing their needs and wants. And when they do that, they change their behaviors. That creates an opportunity for new products and services to be offered to them, often in a different type of offering that we call a business model. Freemium is an example of that. Subscription models is an example of that, and many others. The established companies should understand this, and they should identify where are they most likely to get disrupted in the customer's value chain. not from their point of view, but from their customers. What are their customers most unsatisfied with in those activities that they're offering, products or services? And we do this job. We go to companies and say, well, you think you're being disruptive for XYZ reasons. Let's understand your customers. Let's measure, for example, their NPS scores or their satisfaction level at each point of the customer value chain, not as an aggregate, because that doesn't help you identify or assess where your problems are.
Good point. Good point.
And then we find often 1, 2, or more of these weak links, activities that customers are forced to do because they don't have any other option, because they're not really focusing on it. And those are those activities that startups are most likely to disrupt the company through the process of decoupling, basically saying, we're going to do this better for you, right? So all of these examples that I shared are businesses that said, there's an opportunity here in the market. And then they create a business model around it. And often startups, what they do, they're just faster at creating something simple, a simple offering that starts to steal customers away from the incumbent company. So the incumbent companies need to know, where are their weak links? Number 1, how to plug in these links, how to improve them. And often, in my experience, making it cheaper, faster, or easier for consumers to do those activities often is the starting of this process to making it better, such that you don't have this big pain point that startups are looking to exploit and build businesses around. And then once you identify that, then you can go through a process of identifying a business model to offer customers those better services or products in that point, and or identifying the technologies that allow you to deliver better satisfaction in that activity at scale.
Beautiful. Very clear. Again, I have more questions, but we're reaching the top of our time with you, and so much of your work is accessible and available. How can people find you and follow you and continue to learn from you, Thales?
Well, I've written this book called Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. That was more than 7 years of research where I summarize the principles, give examples, and really talk about the first few chapters are about how disruption really works. What is really disrupting your business? If you think it is technology, I try to make the claim that in most cases, it is not. There are cases that technology is a real disrupt. Electric cars, real disrupt. But in the vast majority of cases, the technologies are off the shelf, are available to anybody. And those are not the real causes of disruption. And by the way, we've seen many new technologies that have been hyped around. And because of lack of customer adoption, they don't disrupt any markets. Metaverse is there. If you're not in the video game industry, metaverses have not been massively adopted by consumers. And even Facebook, Meta has kind of shifted its position on that. So it's important to understand what is really disrupting your business. Because if you get it wrong, then whatever you do will be the wrong response to that. And then afterwards, in the second part of the book, I really try to help incumbents. Once they understand that, I provide frameworks and examples of cases so they can understand pitfalls to avoid. Really important. Other companies have been responding, and there's a lot of failure. If you ask me, can you give me 10 examples of successful incumbents that responded to disruption? I'll probably say I can't. If you ask me for 5, I'll have a hard time. Something along the lines of 1 handful of successful responses. So it is a very complicated and challenging activity to do a digital transformation of established companies. And so I think just read as much as possible. Also, Googling my name, Thales Teixeira, Decoupling. You can probably get a lot of Harvard Business Review articles, cases, podcasts. Hopefully yours goes on the air and will help start the process of education.
Great. Well, yeah, I certainly bought the book soon after it was published, and it's outstanding. I highly recommend it. Thales, thank you so much for the work you do and for taking some time to share it with us here.
My pleasure. So glad to be here. Thanks for the questions and the interest in my work, Kaihan.
Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our producers, Karina Reyes and Zach Ness, our editor, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kaihan Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next week with another episode of Outthinkers.